the usual questions that people want to know is, how did you start collecting? Why? And how come you have such a great collection of imperial porcelain?
Well, yeah, that's actually several questions in a row.
Yes.
It's going to be hard to answer. But yeah, I became interested, I suppose, by actually reading autobiographies were probably the first interest in Russian history, that type of thing.
So what library was it where you read?
Well, I went to a place called St. Norbert's. It was a boarding school up in De Pere, Wisconsin, and the college library was down below, so I used to go down there and pick up some biographies and things like that. But then later on, the interest evolved around what was behind the Iron Curtain. You always heard about the Iron Curtain, and then I kind of became interested in Eastern Europe, and then I began to specialize on Russia, Catherine the Great. I was just looking at this book here, and here's an interesting picture here of Catherine the Great with her 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different favorites, I guess they were called back in those days. Mm-hmm. Anyway, then I suppose I was looking for something tangible. I was interested in architecture, the Baroque period and the neoclassical period, and St. Petersburg and Moscow. And then I guess I wanted something a little more tangible. So after my trip to Russia in 1975, then I came back home and I found 2 plates down in Milwaukee that had the imperial eagle symbol, the double-headed eagle, and from the Gachina service. So that was the beginning of the collection. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there was another question. But you first, I remember once you told me you went to London for a summer study.
Well, yes, yeah, I went there for two summers, and then I started collecting Russian silver.
Mm-hmm. And at that time in London you could buy some
it at Portobello
Russian
Road or in some of the shops. You would go to all the shops, and it was easy to get a hold of the Russian silver. Mm-hmm. That was back in '68 and '69, so it was not. I didn't become interested in porcelain until having also gone to the Milwaukee Auction Gallery. They had a collection of Korniloff porcelain. And I raised my hand. So that was the first, the first piece of silver also was purchased there, and also then the first porcelain was purchased there. And then after
where, in London?
No, in Milwaukee, yeah, and that also got me interested. Yeah, see, this all goes back over many years. Yeah, because I've been collecting since basically 1975. Those first pieces were in the late 1960s, and that got me interested.
Yeah, and another question that I was asked also, how did that much imperial porcelain end up here in the United States?
All right. Apparently, they sold an awful lot of it during the Soviet period underneath Stalin in 1928-29. You needed American dollars, I guess, in order to purchase American tractors and things like that. So you need to have foreign currency. So they were willing to sell off the treasures. At least we call them treasures now, but at that time they were just what's another phrase they used to use in that time? Bourgeoisie, bourgeois decorative arts or something like that. Anyway, then they sold an awful lot of it off then. And then also Mrs. Post of the Post cereal fortune. She was married to Ambassador Joseph E. Davies, who was from Wisconsin, so that's another little tangible interest there. And then they sailed over to St. Petersburg in 1937 and 38 when he was an ambassador, and then they ended up in Moscow, obviously, and she began to purchase a lot of materials there. So actually Hillwood was very instrumental in, it was a place to study more of the decorative arts, and also porcelain. And then I purchased a book printed in 1906. It was done by this Baron von Wolff, was the director of the Imperial Porcelain Factory. And then in 1906 he went back all the way to Empress Elizabeth I, documenting some of the pieces for each of the eras, and then going through and showing all the different styles that were developed over the years. Of course, there's so much information in there that I don't know because I do not speak Russian.
So where could one buy imperial porcelain in the 1970s and 80s?
In the 1970s, all right, well, I'd have to say the auction houses were the main source. Christie's and Sotheby's and Bonhams in London, and Christie's and Sotheby's in New York. I used to buy quite a bit from the auction houses, but now it's a lot easier just to deal with private dealers. And sometimes if you have something at an auction house that you'd like to have, you'd be able to have them get it for you. You pay them a commission, but you don't have to worry about having to pay the sales tax. Or you don't have to worry about hiring somebody to crate it up and bring it to the post office. That gets to be awfully expensive these days. So sometimes it's just as easy to work through a dealer, and there are a few that are still in the Russian market, but now it's become rather difficult to get a hold of materials. Although the auction houses, they still do seem to come up with some fantastic porcelains and enamels and Fabergé pieces. Yeah, so there's still a lot of things being sold. I think a lot of the things are things that were purchased by early collectors.
So they start moving around.
Coming around again, and they're for sale. So I don't think there's not as much coming out of Russia. There was a time in Russia, even in the 1960s, as I think you mentioned that too. In the 1960s, they sold the Kremlin service over at Christie's in London. So that put a whole large segment of that service onto the market. Yeah. But now I don't think there's as much coming. I don't think they're not interested in selling directly from Russia. So now most of the pieces come through the auction houses and from private parties that are now willing to part because the prices are up quite a bit. So
yeah. And the last question. Now, when you have your morning cup of coffee, do you drink it from imperial porcelain?
No, I don't even. I really don't keep imperial porcelain around. It's always in storage. Yeah, I have the catalogs, I have the PowerPoints, and that seems to be it. But that's one reason I wanted to come back here for a final look at your fabulous production.